This is a common warning that you see pretty much everywhere on social media, and also when you're watching any kind of video content or written content of any type. And it's a very good thing because nowadays people are aware of what are the factors and things that can actually really set them off, and what can be a response to that, and they don't want to be held liable for that, for having those adverse reactions. Now, every living being, including humans, animals, all of us have triggers. And this also inevitably shows up for healthcare providers when they're in consultations with their patients. However, have you ever thought about how to manage your triggers when your patients have their own, and make sure that they don't clash and you don't set each other off? This can be quite a slippery slope to navigate through. So to learn more about how to do it, watch the rest of the video. Welcome back to my channel, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Shweta. I'm the founder of Healthy Dynamics. We are a coaching practice that helps healthcare providers from English as a second language backgrounds communicate better, improve their language fluency in order for them to build trust-based, authentic relationships with their patients that are sustainable in the long term, where they can also build influence and authority and excel in their workplace and profession. So one of the things that I have commonly observed and experienced, and also been made aware of in what I do as a coach, is the fact that every individual has things that can trigger them. So for example, trigger in very simple definition means that anything that is going to, like a stimulus, that is going to really provoke usually an unpleasant or unfavorable or a negative reaction of some sort. Now, believe it or not, all living things are triggered. So, back in very traditional biological science, when you learn about the nervous system, you have the very common, well-known model called the stimulus response model. So obviously, when you have any kind of stimuli, so anything that is going to cause some sort of reaction in you in a good way or bad way, is then, carried out by your nervous system, and it takes care of everything. However, here in this video and throughout all the examples in my content, I'm going to specifically focus on emotional triggers. So specifically the ones that are going to invoke some kind of a traumatic or a bad, unpleasant, sad, and sometimes frightening, more or less a flight or fight kind of response in anybody. Now, every single individual, every single human being can be triggered, no matter how good of an upbringing, no matter how good of a childhood they've had, no matter even if they've been the most privileged in every sense of the word, they can 100% be triggered by something or other. Now, for example, a person like me who has never experienced anything traumatic in her childhood, who had pretty much quite a privileged, pleasant, secure, and loving childhood, there are certain things that definitely trigger me. So, for example, this is to do with my own individual personality. So, for things like, because I grew up in India, and which is hugely populated, there's people everywhere and there's noise everywhere. Now that I live in a country like Australia that's not there, when I'm in environments that are noisy, that are chaotic, that are crowded, that are in particular very, very, sort of cramped up, and especially when there's a lot of clutter, that 100% triggers my anxiety. Another big factor for me that triggers my anxiety is traffic. So if I'm sitting in traffic for a long time, 100% it will set me off. Now, you don't have to look very far. My dog, who has appeared in some of the videos, he also is triggered by many, many different things. So for example, anything that anyone that runs, anyone who is in anything moving, so not a car, anything like two-wheeler. So for example, a motorbike or a cycle completely sets him off. Or if the doorbell rings, it sets him off. Now, with dogs, it's a little bit different, so because they are programmed to actually set the alarm and tell people that something is happening. But similarly, for all healthcare providers, you can also be triggered by numerous factors. And in my post this week, I have spoken about some of the causes for triggers and also how to identify them. So I'm going to leave both those posts from LinkedIn up here, so do go and check them out, just to get a little bit of a context. Now, let's put this, take it to the scenario of when you are in correspondence or consultation with your patients. And even though this is mostly common in a mental health professional setting, it can happen anywhere. So what can happen quite often is that patients may unintentionally say or do things that can set you off and that can trigger you. So say, for example, you can be a receptionist, for example, and you may have a patient who is coming in and being very demanding and very aggressive and borderline violent. That can completely trigger you and set you off if, say, you have experienced that in the past in an abusive home or in a relationship. So instead of reacting in a not so good way and ruining the experience for both yourself as well as the patient who's there for help and support, there are ways in which you can actually navigate through the situation in order to and manage your triggers to not only ensure better outcomes for your patient and make sure that they have a positive experience overall, and you're able to deliver that experience to them, but also it helps you build your own personal mental well-being, resilience, and also avoids burnout. So I'm going to look at 4 or 5 ways in which simple ways in which you can actually manage your triggers in a healthcare setting. So let's get into it. Number 1, identify your triggers and their root causes. So as always, awareness is the first step. I talk a lot about self-awareness in my content, and it is one of the pillars of my coaching program. So you have to really be mindful and aware of what sets you off, what it is that is going to invoke a negative reaction from you, why that's the reason, and what may have led to it. Now, say for a very common example that can happen is that somebody in their childhood, they may have been bitten by a stray dog of some sort. This was quite common when I was growing up in India. And as a result, growing up, they were 100%, they became fearful of dogs. Similarly, if you say if you're working in any kind of healthcare setting, you may have a patient who can, and this is a bit of a benign example, you may have a patient who is in consultation with you, and they can have a lot of needles in their body, or they could even be covered up in tattoos. And you may have a perception, or you may have had some sort of an experience in the past that has led you to believe that people who've got tattoos are dangerous. So once you're aware of that way you're better prepared as to when you have patients in the future who are going to come, who are inevitably going to be covered in tattoos, because that's very common nowadays. How can you actually navigate that? So really identifying and being aware of what are your cues is really your first step towards doing it, towards managing. Number 2 is distinguishing your experience from the one of your patients. Now, for example, if a patient, and I'm going to be quite specific in this example about, say, someone in mental health. So you are, say, a counselor, a therapist, a psychotherapist who is talking to somebody who has experienced a lot of trauma for numerous reasons. Childhood trauma, grew up in a dysfunctional home, they had things in their past where that has really sort of damaged them in some way, and you may have had very similar experiences. So in that case, what can unconsciously you might tend to do is you can react, project on sort of your triggers onto your patient, who is really, when you're supposed to be the bigger person, who's supposed to have more maturity, calmness, wisdom, and more self-awareness on how to manage that and how to really compartmentalize yourself from that situation. Now, this is a concept that I remember talking with my colleague and guest, Margaret Bennett, on one of our previous interviews on this channel, where she speaks about how we can manage our individual traumas while helping patients and clients who also experience trauma. So I'm going to leave a link of that video up here to just, you can check that out just to get a bit more context. So the point here is that you need to take yourself out of the current equation or circumstances or the causes and focus on your patient. Now, regardless of, if, say, the patient is speaking in a way or communicating with you in a way that can, I'm not saying angers you necessarily, but it can remind you of a past unpleasant experience that you had with a family member or a friend or a past romantic relationship. It is important for you to disassociate yourself with that past event at least for the time being, focus on your patient, why they're experiencing it, what they're going through, and how you can help best support them in order to navigate through their situation and their challenge. So that's number 2. Number 3 is design your environment to minimize the exposure to your triggers, really to protect yourself. Now, this is quite relevant when you are possibly neurodivergent, or you may have patients also who are neurodivergent, who can be triggered by loud noises, who can be triggered by bright lights, who can be triggered by clutter or certain colors, so things like that. So in that situation, you should design your consultation room in such a way that, again, these sort of scenarios are minimized in terms of how they're going to affect yourself and other people. And this is quite common with patients who are neurodivergent, where the rooms that they work in and where they are getting their help from a support worker or anyone who is in the space of actually assisting them, those sensory overloads are completely sort of minimized, and the stimulus is completely reduced. And also, it's worthwhile discussing with the patient what may be triggering for them. And although, really it's also, not only is it beneficial for them, but it also puts you in an empowering position of making sure that you're in an environment where you're not going to be set off in any way, and you can work in a way that is going to be a relatively calm and easeful sort of environment for both of you. So it's a win-win situation in every way. Number 4 really is that own your feelings, being open about them and communicate about them. Now, in one of my videos from Tuesday, if you remember, I did address the question of whether is it worth actually sharing what triggers you with your patients. And like I mentioned in that video, it's not really a good idea to do that. But also it's important to not, suppress or numb your feelings in any way. They are unpleasant. So it is important for you to experience those feelings and acknowledge them, and also be aware of why you're getting those feelings. And when I say communicate, you can obviously have, some sort of, like a heads up you can give to your patient and say to them, listen, that I'm going to be talking about or showing you certain things or talking about certain things that might be triggering for us both. So I just want to make sure that you are in a good space to be able to absorb all that. And I will make sure that I'm checking in with you regularly just to make sure that you are feeling you're in a good space and you are also feeling quite good about going through this. So by acknowledging the fact that you also can have those triggers, yes, a patient can be quite reassured that, the person I'm speaking to is a human, and, and they're just as valuable as they are. So while that might be a good way to find some common ground and connect with your patients, it's also important to not go into too much detail. And number 5, most important, is that you have to be compassionate and kind to yourself, and practice a lot of self-care, not only to prevent burnout and build resilience, but also for you to be able to show up as the best version of yourself to your patients, and also be able to serve and support them the best. And there is absolutely no shame or harm in getting help, not only from your colleagues, but anyone who is professional, including the people who are therapists themselves or who work in mental health themselves. It's very common for them to get therapy help and support of their own, just so that they're also not only being held accountable, but also that they have someone as like a sounding board, someone to vent to, someone who can support them, to put them in a good place so that they can be their best self professionally and otherwise. So these are some of the strategies that I have covered on what are the triggers that you may have that may impact your communication with your patients and how you can best manage them. So to check out and be up to date with similar content on this video, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And hope you got some value and insight after this video. Thank you very much for your time, attention, and presence, and I'll see you next week.